Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We have a very special guest joining us. She is in charge of the Center for Family and Human Rights Youth Bureau. Her name is Yulia, and she and I met over at the United Nations a couple of weeks ago at the Commission on the Status of Women, which is essentially the world's largest feminist conference, largest gathering. And I met her in a very unique way, which you're going to hear about in this podcast episode. Thank you for joining us. Let's jump right in. Well, welcome, Yulia, to the program. I'm really grateful that you could join me today. I met you first this year. I actually met your former colleague, I guess, who used to be in your position at the UN with CFAM, and Craig Austin. He's now gone. But then I was like, who's going to fill his position? And so CFAM chose you. And I'm so glad they did, because this year at CSW, and for those who don't know what CSW is, it's the Commission on the Status of Women. We were sitting in, I forget whose event it was, but it was so selective. It was very tiny. And I was like, man, is there anyone else in here who's like pro-family, pro-woman, pro-life? And then I think you were the first one to lift your hand and raise a question. But before we get into all of that, welcome to the program, as I said. Could you give us a little bit of a background as to how you even came to be with CFAM and why you're with them?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for having me, Matea. Well, I graduated university in 2023. I studied political science. When I started college and through my first year in college, I had a very different worldview than I do now. I was definitely very progressive. And at the time, I don't even know if I would know how to categorize it as such. I would just kind of do the things that people on campus did, the kind of advocacy that was the mainstream type. I just joined that, not really questioning much. And I changed my views over time, especially, I would say, during COVID. I started to question a lot of the mainstream narrative, and I would see how speech would be censored a lot online, and that really kind of raised the flag for me. Why are people silenced over these normal good intended questions? And then I think on the topic specifically of abortion, in 2019 I went to DC with some friends from college. We lobbied for sexual and reproductive health. And this is a euphemism that hides a larger agenda. And it hides it because there are still people who oppose it. And they know that it just doesn't sound very good to say abortion access. So they use this term, sexual and reproductive health. And so at the time, I thought this is a great initiative. Who would not want women to have access to adequate health care, right? So I joined them, and I knew abortion was kind of part of it, but I did not understand the extent to which it was a part of it. And at the time, I also didn't have any philosophical understanding or conviction on this topic, or theological conviction. So I did this kind of work and advocacy. Well, that was just a one-time experience, but throughout college, I founded the UNICEF Unite chapter in my university. I was a UNICEF...
I didn't know that. Okay, this is fascinating. Continue.
I was a UNICEF Unite youth representative in Philly. So I was very big on the, SDG agenda and everything, because I truly believed in it. And I thought it's helping people. But as time passed by, and as I mentioned, during COVID, when I started to question the mainstream narrative, to look a little bit deeper into the topics that I think, just take for granted, or positions rather that I would take for granted, I started to take a step back. I remember I was taking an ethics class also, and that's when I started to really kind of question, because we were asked to think about abortion and make a compelling argument in favor of it or not. And I just found it difficult to argue in favor of it. And I just thought, wait a minute, why have I done that kind of advocacy without being able to actually defend my position? This is absurd. But then I would say that it all came together for me in 2022, I believe, when I had such a transformative faith experience where I rediscovered Christianity for what it really is, the Word of God. And so that really kind of transformed me and made these convictions much stronger. Sorry, this was a very long way. I didn't even answer your question. So given all of this journey, I wanted to join the conservative movement. I wanted to help promote principles that I believe are healthy for a society, such as family, pro-life values, freedom of speech. So as I was about to graduate, I was looking into opportunities to do that. And through a Heritage Foundation job bank, I found out about CFAM. And I saw, pro-life, pro-family group at the United Nations. So it paired the things that I was aware of, familiar with in the past, but with a twist of my new convictions. So that would be a very long answer. I apologize.
No, I love hearing the context because it's a journey, right? Like, because when we had initially met, you had raised your hand and addressed the panel that we'll get into. You addressed them about being labeled as anti-rights and basically how unwise and unfair that is to actually categorize people as that. Nonetheless, and you said it beautifully then, it was based upon a worldview. But hearing the journey of how you came to be in that place, because you said you used to be an advocate for SRH. And so that changes the whole dynamic. And then adding to it that you were a part of UNICEF, that adds a whole other layer. So it's like a perfect transformative story of really, in university, I remember Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk talking about this years and years ago, how the majority of young people are only ever presented with one worldview and told you need to think this way. And so then when people are exposed to new ideas and a different worldview, it's like, I didn't even know this is what I was talking in favor of. So it's actually really cool to hear that was part of your story.
Yeah, and not to exaggerate, but I think it could be a form of abuse because you're essentially gathering people who are inexperienced, easily impressionable, and you are equipping them to advocate for causes that you tabled for them. And I feel like, again, maybe it's a strong word, abuse, exploitation, but I do kind of feel like there was all of these adults. And I was an adult at the time, but seriously thinking, just not even turned 18 at the time. So it was a time of really exploration, trying to understand the world. That's what it's meant to be. And to be no one forced me, so I don't want to create the impression I'm a victim or anything, but I think it's a dangerous movement to just drag young people to advocate for causes they don't understand, and they shouldn't be expected to have a fully fleshed worldview at that age, I believe.
Absolutely. And you're going in there straight out of high school, and these are authoritative figures in your life now, where they're supposedly the experts and you're there paying to learn. And so you would think that you're going to be presented with a lot of different worldviews or a lot of different perspectives, but you really it's like you're being force-fed really what to believe and what to think.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I'm not necessarily placing the blame on my university because I think this is an issue that cuts across, institutions, and it happens at most universities maybe, but I'm just talking about these advocacy groups that are very much targeting young people for their efforts.
And something that I've noticed within the UN, I mean, I've been there for many, many years, but especially with UNICEF and UNESCO and UNFPA, they target young people very intentionally, and they target education very in an immense pace and fervor. So that's something that I think having young women, because at the UN, it's this whole feminist worldview where everything's seen through that lens of if women are involved in it, then it's going to be good. But then there's these anti-rights groups, which are presented at the UN, especially this year at CSW, 5 women. And it's like, we're the ones being slammed for presenting a different worldview, a different way of looking at it. Go ahead.
Exactly, not that kind of woman. Like, it's almost like we want young people, and then you're a young person and you do not feel represented by their youth representative. They're supposed to talk for what, all youth in the world or in a country? That's ridiculous. And then there you are, I'm their age, and that's not something I believe in. So it's quite ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And the first time I went to the UN, I was so naive. I was already working in Parliament Hill in Canada, but I was still naive about the UN. And I was like, oh my gosh, like there's so many people here. And so in order to take that stand in front of a room, it could be in a room of 30 people, it could be a room of 500-600 people. And to raise your hand or put on that mic and actually address. So it's not just when you're coming from our perspective, and you're in a room where all these vulnerable people, some of them very sturdy and steadfast in their belief, but others of them quite vulnerable because it might be their first time. And you're just presenting a different worldview. It can take a lot the first couple of times you do it. So what is the feeling that you first got? Because I know the feeling I first got, and I was like, ugh, I got a pit in my stomach, I got a frog in my throat, but I'm here to do what I believe is the Lord's work. So what was your first couple experiences, and has it like changed for you at all going into these forums?
Well, it's funny because it's a full circle moment, because I remembered I was not with UNICEF. I was with UNICEF USA, which is a US-based advocacy group advocating for UNICEF, but they do advocate for the exact same causes. They support UNICEF USA supports UNICEF. But again, I remembered or thought about the moments where I would be with them, in those meetings, and I was saying the right thing. So here I am now, obviously, as you mentioned, knowing very well that they will not only disagree with what I have to say, but like they wish I was not there. So I felt scared. And I remember just thinking, oh gosh, like it's almost like all eyes are on you and you're like the enemy in the room, like the elephant in the room. And I just thought like everything about me, like probably, I don't know, in their head, like I'm just so uncool right now. But what helped me was I just thought about the fact that I am, as you mentioned, I am doing what I know to be true. What I know that God has said is true. So it's only through Him and through His strength that I was able, I believe, to deliver what I had to deliver, coherently in a composed manner, because I was shaking on the inside. And maybe that's because I'm also more of an maybe introvert, anxious type. So I really thought of this thing that it's His eyes that matter the most. So that gave me a lot of ease. So I was able to do my job, but it was scary.
It is scary. Like even giving those addresses, it's not even just asking questions. It's even when you sit down and you're there reading an oral statement. So for anybody who doesn't know, if you have ECOSOC status and you're able, which again, we use so many acronyms. So the Economic and Social Council at the UN. If you have status there, as we do with our organizations, you can write an oral statement and submit it, and you might be able to read it out. And so reading even an oral statement out in front of all these people where their eyes are just staring at you in disbelief that you're even there, it takes a toll. I don't know about you, but sometimes I do feel like this spiritual pull in me.
Absolutely.
And it's like, oh, like you just feel it in the place. And that environment is saturated with a completely different spirit than what I'm used to operating in every day. But nonetheless, that's why it's so important that we show up. Now, I want to get to that one meeting because it was so incredible at this Commission on the Status of Women, which is just a couple of weeks ago, where we were sitting in this, actually, before we even got into the room. I don't know about you, but I got into the room by the skin of my teeth. There was about 30, maybe 40 people in this small room. And I actually sat beside a journalist who wrote that article that you put out on your Instagram, and she was from The Guardian, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So we'll get into that. But I was seated beside her, and she was like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Well, what do you do?" So we had this interesting conversation. And then, but I was like, what a testament for her to witness in this small group of people. I think it was 3 of our people actually got questions, 3 out of 5, maybe 4 out of 5. And you were the first one. So leading up to that point, did you come into that meeting with a prepared question? Or was it like, I'm just going to see what they have to say, and then I'm going to address what it is?
Well, I knew that I would likely want to say something because it was about the backlash, the anti-rights. I knew that this is us who they're talking about, or we're included in that like larger umbrella together with the Taliban. So it's crazy.
Yes.
So I was at a different meeting before that, and I wanted, again, they mentioned misinformation, disinformation, anti-rights. So I did draft a question for that meeting that I never got the chance to ask because the meeting ended before people could ask questions. And so I did have something sketched out, but I didn't have a fully fleshed out idea of what it will be. I kind of wanted to hear what they have to say and kind of pivot from that point.
Okay, that makes sense, because it was just so coherent and well formulated that I was like, wow, like she just, even still being able to, because you weren't reading off of a paper, it was like just coming out of you. It was so well done. So you were addressing, well, I'll say this, a minister, I don't remember, is the Flemish minister, or I think that's who it was.
Actually,
Do you remember?
I don't remember on top of my head, but it's a very easy search. I could search it up if you want.
Okay. I'll keep talking if you want to look it up. But I just remember there being this minister of a country. And of course, it's all females on this panel. And she was about to come at you. And I just saw, like, I was sitting back behind the panelists, so I couldn't see their faces. But I could see her body language starting to change. And she wanted to address your question statement more so. And I was like, wow, what she came back at you with was shocking. It was actually shocking. And part of what she said is she was not even willing to tolerate you, nor even have a discussion with people like you. And that was so contrary and contradictory to what I had heard in a couple different of these meetings, where it's like, we need to reach across the aisle. We need to be the bridge and talk with people who don't agree with us. And that was something that I've seen consistently at the UN, but not so much as I saw it this year. Is that something that you've seen consistently throughout your time? Like, this year was just strange in many facets, but what was your experience?
I will say that, and this is something that me and my colleagues who were talking about, that last year at CSW, there were not as many events about anti-rights backlash. Like, it seems like this was really the centerpiece of the conference in many ways. I mean, they had so many events on this, and sponsored by the richest countries in the world,
the Nordic countries in general.
Countries,
were so bad.
Yeah, and then there were just so many of them, and I have heard a lot of anti-rights rhetoric because it does come out of a lot of UN reports. A lot of UN agencies like to talk about it. I've heard member states making statements about the anti-rights, the backlash. They need to push back against the pushback. But again, the umbrella is so large that it gets so confusing. I mean, you have the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, and then you have a group of women leading an NGO that say, we believe life begins at conception. We need to protect it and speak up for it at the UN. And so it seems like they are very much willing to bring both of these groups under the same label. And, the whole, like, we're fascists, racist, like every kind of ugly name out there is attached to us just for this worldview that we have.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very good point. It is a very broad umbrella. And yet there are very anti-women regimes that sit like in the Human Rights Council at the UN and lead even the Women's Council at the UN. Like it's very, I feel, hypocritical But I mean, there's a lot of that contradiction that happens within the UN system in general. Now, also something I noticed, which I don't know if you noticed, which I'd be interested in on your perspective on this. I noticed there was a lot of talk this year about like religious groups in general.
Yeah.
And that was a big one from some of the African group, not all of them, because some of them are very, very pro-family, pro-women. But then also other ones where it was like from the Nordic countries to South America. It just seems like everywhere. And years ago, when I first went, 2018, I think it was, when I first went, I just heard one tiny snippet at an event where it was some governments and then church leaders, and they were like, we need to basically go after church leaders and demand that they present whatever their truth is, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Quran, whether it's the Torah, all through a feminist lens. And if they don't do it, we're going to attack them and demand it. But this year, it was over the top. So obviously, you're sounding like you agree. So if you'd like to give your perspective and experience on that one.
I agree. I've heard a lot of that too. It's a strategy they have, because when you think about it, what is one of the biggest stumbling blocks on the abortion issue is the faith. Where does this conviction come from? Especially if you trace it back to the beginnings of Christianity, the early Christian church. They were against abortion from the beginning. So this was very much like a Christian spirit animating it. And so you also have Muslim countries also objecting to abortion on theological grounds. But it's the faith community. The faith communities really are the backbone of this. So if they can reach churches and pastors and priests and somehow twist the narrative and make it seem as if, no, there's no consensus among religious communities on this. I mean, look, there's the Catholics for choice. They are Catholics. They believe in abortion. So if they're able to fracture religious communities and make it appear as if abortion is ambiguous theme, or it's morally, it's compatible with having a faith, be it Christianity or Islam, then they gain ground, and it becomes more and more acceptable, socially acceptable. So that's what they're trying to do. But obviously they have no chance with the Orthodox Church, with the Catholic Church. They go to fringe groups. They go to dissidents within larger churches, or to the really progressive ones that you'd question whether they even hold to the tenets of the faith they proclaim, which cannot be said for, let's say, Catholics for choice, because of their heretical statements. So it's very unfortunate, and it's very disingenuous. You're trying to twist something for a narrative, which is something that they often do. But when I say they, I mean all of the really left-leaning progressive advocacy groups. And I think it's particularly sad to do it with communities of faith and with religious leaders.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you brought up Catholics for Choice, and I have to insert this story because a couple years ago during COVID, there's a group of us from Campaign Life Coalition who obviously everything was online, like all the meetings, all the events, and it was just very weird. But a group of us basically went into this Catholics for Choice event online, and we just took over the whole event, and we flustered all of the panelists and those, the head of Catholics for Choice at the moment, whoever, I don't remember what her name was, but she had short bob hair, and she was very flustered and very angry with us. And I wasn't even Catholic. And I was like, you're not even holding to the tenets of your faith. What are we doing here? And so, but it's interesting because once you present the truth, people often on those fringe side or the more progressive side, where a lot of those groups have been taken over by these leftist ideologies or worldviews, they often get flustered when presented with a worldview that contradicts their own. Because I think, and this is just maybe my perspective on it, which please bring yours if you'd like, is that they're often just given talking points that sound good. They're close enough to the truth that they itch their ears just enough. And then it's like, how many people are actually listening to these people though? And that's why it's important we show up and show that not everybody goes along. What would you say to that?
Couldn't agree more. I was at one Catholics for Choice parallel event, and then at the other event, they were invited to speak. I believe a former president of Catholics for Choice. She led the group for tens of years. I can't remember the name right now, but she was there, and I think we're talking about the same person. Blonde hair, short, blonde hair. Yeah, it was a particularly sad meeting to join because they were very agitated. They wanted to disrupt. They wanted to, and I can understand not being fully aligned with everything an institution does, be it a church. But the kind of rhetoric was very, very aggressive and but outright disrespectful. And the thing is that I also approached them at the end. I didn't get the chance to ask a question, but I approached them at the end, and I did ask this lady, why is she doing what she's doing, or why is she a Catholic and not a Protestant if she doesn't agree with the church teachings, but in good faith still wants to pursue the Christian faith. And it was just a very sad moment because I could see her just not being able to give an answer, and she was distressed, but not distressed. I think I approached her gently, and she felt comfortable in a sense, or at least that's my impression in our interaction. But she just could not give a coherent answer, and this person did this kind of work for tens of years. How could it be that after so many years you can't explain really your position? It's a sad and unfortunate thing that is happening, and I wish there were more flexibility for discussion and actual theological conversation. I'm sure they've been exposed to the other views, but I think you are right. We should be in those spaces, and as much as we can, try to represent the different perspectives than theirs.
Yeah. And something really cool happened after the event where I first heard you. You actually had a woman come up to you and pull you aside outside of the room where we met, and she actually asked you some really interesting questions. Could you fill us in on what happened in that conversation? Because that's happened to me before, and it's one of those really positive moments that I hold on to, and it kind of keeps me going. And so if you could share what happened there, because I think it's just a beautiful story.
Sure. So after at this event, basically I asked them, why do they feel the need to always label us anti-rights, fascists, as I described previously, all these names. And I explained the journey I went through and how I changed my views. But, I'm here representing a different worldview, but I only asked them to recognize that they also operate under a worldview with its precepts that are very, clearly established. There's no question. There's no coincidence that it so happened that once they subscribe to the progressive secular worldview, on every other topic, things fall in line, and they all believe the same things, say the same things. I mean, come on, it cannot be a coincidence. Just the way in Christianity, we also tend to have more or less a uniform understanding on human nature. And how we should relate to one another, social policy, and so forth. So I only asked them to recognize that these are two different worldviews. And she approached me, and she was very kind and gentle, and she wanted me to know that she wasn't there to attack me or to cause any kind of stress after that already stressful experience, but she wanted to know why did I change my views and how come I'm no longer doing the kind of advocacy I used to do. And so I walked her through a little bit of my journey, but I think the focus or the emphasis in that discussion was on my um, philosophical conversion and just the importance of philosophy, believe it or not, and how it's really at the basis of everything we do. And trying to pretend that that is not the case is it's either disingenuous or plain evil, because again, it just drives so much. And it would, I think, if we would be able to recognize that, to define our terms, to at least recognize where we stand, that would open the door for much more, I think, understanding, much more, I wouldn't say collaboration, because, there's only as much collaboration between very different worldviews, but at least a starting point, an honest starting point. So she was very receptive. I don't think I changed her views on abortion in like the 5 minutes talk we had, but I could see her nodding and just be like, that actually does make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And that's like the gold nuggets of these commissions, I feel. Yes, you're standing up in front of a bunch of people and exposing them. It's like you're scattering seeds, and you don't know what's going to produce fruit. But for myself, I was like, man, there was a young woman from Be Human from Mexico, and she was there to raise her hand in a room of almost 600 people. And she had a question to ask, and it was about post-abortive care. And the panelist of a bunch of Nordic women who were in government, and I guess one man was up there, male representation, I guess they have to have him there. But he was up there and he actually answered her question. And a lot of people, I was sitting there and I was like, man, if I didn't agree, or if I did agree with abortion, what an interesting question to talk about. Yeah, maybe women who have gone for an abortion maybe do have to deal through mental, physical, emotional, even spiritual things afterwards. So it's just planting those seeds for people to start thinking. Because if, again, you're not presented with a different way of thinking or a different idea, how can you ever have your mind changed or a more colored in picture, even philosophically, if you are exposed to a different way of thinking? So even on the philosophical side, what was like the linchpin, that one thing that really started for you where you just went, oh, my eyes are now open and I need to start thinking through some things a little bit more differently?
I think it was an ethics class. So it was like the ABCs of philosophy, really. Like nothing easier than that, which is just like pure argumentation. Premise 1, premise 2, conclusion type. So it's just how simple. Because that's the thing. In all of these political science classes, or even some philosophy classes, if they're politically or if they're more aligned with a type of advocacy than searching for the truth, it could happen in those classes as well. But I would say I was just exposed to so many pages of making the case for a given policy outcome or a policy outcome in my political science classes. And then here I am taking this ethics class, like 101, something like that. And then what you have to do is to create a clear, concise argument for why is the case that, And so I remember writing, like, this was on a different topic, but I wrote like several pages, and the professor came back to me and said, Julia, it's like really simple, and it's simple, and it should be simple. And maybe it's not as easy to be that concise, but that's the point of the exercise. So I thought, oh, okay, I can do that. And so I think it starts with simplicity. And there's obviously nuance to every argument and to every topic, but you have to be able to clarify your thought process, and that's what it helped me with. And that's how it started, with the question of is abortion morally okay? I think that was kind of like the prompt. And then the answer that the respective philosopher gave, well, by the way, it's not like any conservative philosopher. I don't know his political stance for a fact, but I don't think he had a a particular attachment to the pro-life cause. But his answer was, the abortion question is difficult, and you're irrational to believe that it's not. And basically, and then once you realize that it involves the basic main two questions are: is that a human life? If you have to answer that first question, and then the second you need to answer is, does the right does the woman have the mother, or the society, or whoever else external to it has the right, superseding right over it to kill it, or and so those two simple questions, they're just so crucial to the whole abortion argument. It was never, ever brought up in any of my advocacy, because advocacy starts after these questions are asked. So the expectation, well, not really, but the expectation should be that you've answered those questions and then you proceed with advocacy. But I didn't answer, because I didn't know that was something, I didn't see it as relevant. It's very unfortunate, but I think that's what happens in those circles.
Yep, very much so. And that's something I appreciate about our circles is we really educate. Like we are heavy on the education side of it. At least when I first went to the UN, even before I started piggybacking onto CLC and what they were doing at the UN, you have to be educated on our side because you're presented with so many questions.
Yeah.
And so to even come from the side of, hey, philosophically, morally, this is where this is either right or wrong. Let's talk this through. And there's not really a conversation that's to be had with that on the other side, which is always fascinating to me, that dialogue is such a threat. Just people having conversations. It's like there's an advocate right now from Canada, a father who actually just got fined on the streets of Australia for just holding a little tiny billboard on him and having conversations. But the threat is dialogue, and therefore the threat is free speech. And so it's interesting how, again, everything ties into one another based upon worldview, as you were saying. And I think that's the important part, that we actually there's a broader worldview to be had. And that's what we bring in these forums.
And I'm just thinking about the United Nations, United Nations is not your average fringe, shouldn't be, advocacy center that gatekeeps their entry. And they're like, no, this is what, it's not like the United Nations of like Sweden or something. It's like United Nations. It's supposed to be reflective of multiple cultures. In fact, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was in the process of being created, they consulted philosophers, theologians, just like so many kind of perspectives from so many different cultures, with the aim of finding that which was common among them all, that which they all aimed at in terms of human rights. And I think that's a very healthy and realistic approach, which is, let's see what we all share and build from there. And this is a recording in a book called A World Made New by Mary Ann Glendon. And she talks about how no one believed that something could come out of it, because, you have all of these different views, and you have communists, and you have all sorts of perspectives. How could something come out of it, like a coherent declaration of hope? But it did happen. And this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we have now from the United Nations. And my analysis or reflection is that is not the case at the UN anymore. At the time, they had a whole philosophers, I think ECOSOC, she said in the book that they had a philosophers committee.
Yes.
Maybe they do invite philosophers here and there still at the UN to consult, but I just do not see the same type of commitment and the same kind of dedication to or respect for different cultures and national sovereignty. Again, we're not saying that we're not that everyone, like, we're not creating moral equivalence again, because it's impossible. We all have preferences. There's a reason why you live in a country and not other, and so on and so forth, or subscribe to a theological view and not other. But I just do not see that kind of exercise of care, of intention to find and to respect really other views.
That's so well stated. It has come a long way. The whole UN system has come a very long way from where it was founded. Do you think, from your perspective, that there is an opportunity for reform, or do you think maybe in some parts of the UN more so than others? What would you have to say about that?
I would say that it's the progressive worldview is pretty deep at the level of UN agencies, the UN Secretariat. Because you have to make the distinction between the 193 member states, the General Assembly of the UN. That is a democratic process. It functions on a one country, one vote basis. So there you really have the voice of everyone who wishes to speak. That's why you don't have very controversial things in UN high-level UN resolutions adopted by consensus. Because guess what? There is no consensus on those controversial topics, despite what they would like it. Despite how they would like it to be portrayed, as like generally accepted. Everyone agrees this is abortion is a fundamental human right. No, if that were the case, it would have been written somewhere. It's not. But it's so. You asked me about reform. I do not have a lot of faith in the UN agencies at the moment because I see how the bureaucracy of it is just really embedded in the progressive worldview is embedded in everything. It's at the it functions. My colleague Stefano from CFAN likes to say that they're the boilerplate of all the progressive norms. So to reform something like that, I mean, you'd have to like build it from scratch almost. So I think for us, it's more so trying to not give up fully because they will continue to do whatever they're doing. So we can at least be in those rooms in whatever capacity and try to, I don't know, wake them up or just, hello, we're here.
We're here. Don't ignore us.
Hundreds of millions of people believe what we believe. It just so happens you completely chose to ignore us.
Precisely. Very much so. Okay, last question for you, because I know I've taken a lot of your time, and thank you for that. What is it that how can people plug into you and the work you're doing? Because you're in charge, they say the youth wing, I don't know, the youth bureau of CFAM, but it's, I think anybody like 30 and under, 25 and under, I could be off on that too. But what is it that you are heading up on top of all this advocacy, and where can people find what you're doing?
Right. Sure. Sorry. So we have, as you mentioned, the International Youth Coalition is the youth program of the Center for Family and Human Rights. And I write every week a quick recap of what is happening at the UN. So that is on our website, the International Youth Coalition. It's called UN Weekly. We also have a newsletter that goes out. We accept subscribers. You could just email us. The email is on our website. And we would be more than happy to add you to our newsletter. So that goes out every Friday. And then also CFAM publishes every Friday 2 articles. So if you'd like to read those, you could just head to the CFAM website and subscribe to the Friday Facts. And then you will receive them in your inbox every Thursday or Friday.
Wonderful. And I know I have a lot of politicians and I have a lot of advocates and from all different levels and everywhere around the world who listen to this. So please do follow Yulia and what she's doing, as well as CFAM, Center for Family and Human Rights, because that's where I didn't go to school, secondary education. I went straight from high school to working in government. So I was like, I don't understand what's being talked about. So I actually CFAM played a critical role in my learning and development. So you have the Friday Facts, you have what you're writing about once a week, you have the definitions, you have so much just there on that website. That's just like education, pure education. And homeschoolers also listen to this. So if that's something that they're interested in, please do go and follow CFAM and Yulia. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much. It's incredible what you're doing and very, very encouraging as well.
Thank you so much for having me, and kudos to you also for what you do.
Thank you. Well, there you have it. You had a little bit of a glimpse behind the UN curtain as to what takes place on a daily basis and even during these commissions at the United Nations. It's not just myself, it is a group from all across the world that converges at these commissions to take a stand for the preborn, for the family unit, for women, for national sovereignty and free speech, and the list goes on. And that's why it's so incredibly important to have people like Yulia and CFAM and CLC and Be Human and many other groups involved in our pro-family coalition present at the UN. You can go and follow Yulia over at iYouth Coalition. You can also go to CFAM over on their website. You'll be able to connect with all of their publications, but also, as I stated, Instagram is great for us young people. Even people like my grannies over on Instagram. So you can go follow them. Again, iYouth Coalition on Instagram. Thank you for joining this program today. We love you. God loves you. Take care.